Campers. I thought I might take the opportunity of saying that because there mightn't be an opportunity in the future to say such a thing. So it's good to see you all. Yes, as the chair said, there are going to be 3 short, sharp presentations. There's going to be me. I'm going to talk about building regulations and why they should be central to the work going forward and to the RPA. Then Marie is going to come up and say something that is probably opposed to what I'm going to say. Then after that, we will have Des Reid, who will be Des Reid. Des is a mystery man. In fact, looking down through the list of people here, it's lovely to see Robert White, Roy Bennett and Ken Hunter, I see are described as retired gentlemen. And that means, therefore, I would think that possibly Des Reid is the most senior and wisest man now in building control. So he is the sage of Enniskillen. Athens had Diogenes, and we have Des Reid. So I look forward to hearing what Des has to say. He may get me back on that in the near future. I was going to use Bakashka format. I don't know if you've heard of this before. It's Japanese, which means chit-chat or chatter. And the idea is that you would have 20 slides, but you've only 20 seconds per slide to talk about them. So that means this slide presentation should take 6 minutes and 40 seconds. However, I'm an apprentice at this, so it might take 7 minutes and 40 seconds, but here, let's see how we get on. Okay, building regulations, that's what we're all about. These are the Construction Product Directive regulations. This is what the Europeans use, but they came after us. In fact, the building regulations, of course, in GB were created a lot earlier, and the regulations in Northern Ireland are inextricably linked to the ones in GB, and they're drawn up by the DFP. And of course, there's no point having good regulations unless you have excellent enforcement. But why do the regulations exist? The regulations exist for people, the people at large, the general public, the crowds. Us, for example. Now, take, for example, it just occurs to me, Chairman, that the G8 met here in the early part of June. Now, here's a practical application of building regulations and how useful they are. If a fire had taken place in this building, all those great world leaders would have been able to escape the fire by themselves, unaided, and get out of a place of safety. Isn't that great? Well, maybe not one of the best examples to use, but anyway, that's the principle of it. Now, in the old days, you had your building regulations, and then you may have been given 1 or 2 assigned functions. So you had building regulations and danger structures, and perhaps some people had licensing, and that was it. That was building control, those 3 things. And in that situation, the building regulations reigned supreme. They were the most important part of the thing. Now, what some people say, I have heard people say this, sure, it's only one small book. You see, this one small book is rather misleading. The small book itself is rather complex. It is supported by dozens of technical booklets, over 200 British standards, thousands of specifications and details, and today you could have to receive and consider an application from anywhere in Europe. So the small book is just the screensaver. There is an awful lot behind that little book. Now, as building regulations and all became more complex and you have fire engineered solutions and all the rest, you would have imagined logically then that you'd have had a situation where building control was concentrated on building regulations. But in effect, what happened was the councils have taken on over 30 additional functions, in spite of the fact that the regulations have become more complex. And we've looked at this here the last time I was here. These are the additional functions that were taken on. Now, why did that happen? It happened because we were losing money. And so somebody looked at the figures and thought that building control are not gainfully deployed, so we will do these 30 extra things. Well, how far adrift were we from the target? What is the target for cost recovery in building control? Indeed, what is the cost recovery for planning? The cost recovery was set out by NIBRAC in 1991 at 70%. Even in this time of austere and difficult financial times, most councils are achieving 56%, which means we're only 14% adrift, and yet we did 30 additional things. I think we do too many things. What is the first thing Gordon Ramsay does when he comes to look at a menu of a restaurant? Look at a new restaurant to improve it and move it forward. He looks at the menu. And the first thing he does is he cuts out some of the things that the restaurant are serving, down to the things that they do really, really well. And I'm suggesting that's what we should be doing. We have already started on this journey through the SRI process, which is championed by Ashley Borland, who spoke earlier. We uniquely involved councillors in that process, and we came up with a construction that there should be, going forward, some form of committee created by the councils, managed by the councils, designed by the councils, and with councillors on it. And I think, as Paul Everill has maybe mentioned earlier, and Anthony Tokel, if we lose councillor involvement and support, that'll be a really bad day for building control. This is the scene from, one of the first scenes from Star Wars. Now, it's considered to be one of the most arresting beginnings to any movie that there ever was. And what is fascinating about this, and I remember trying to see this film one time, it was quite annoying. There was a fellow who had a bigger head than me sitting in front of me, so I had to dodge around to see it. But what you have in this movie is you have a reasonably big spaceship comes across, and you go, wow, that's a big spaceship. And then there's this even ginormous spaceship, this one here comes on, and then it just blows you away. That is the mothership. And what I'm saying is that our building regulations should be the mothership of all that we do. Now, for those of you who like exacting detail in your presentations, that great big spaceship was the Imperial Star Destroyer. So if you're in a pub quiz, you might want to know that. Now, this is a classic little story here about the Bedouin and his camel. I'm sure I don't have to tell you it all. What happens is that the desert gets very cold at night, and the camel's complaining that he's cold. The Bedouin tells him, you're far too big to get into this tent, will you stay outside? The camel says, well, I only want to put my head in. So the head comes in, and that's fine. Then the camel says, my neck's got very cold, and you can imagine what happens. Eventually, the whole camel is in the tent, and the man himself is out. But what I think is happening is these 30 other things are the camel, and they have moved into our tent, and the building regulations are standing outside. This means then you have some form of tug-of-war between the building control things that we've all agreed are very, very important for the safety of the public, and then all the other things that we are doing. And when that happens, that's not a good thing. When building control becomes something that is an add-on or peripheral to your business, that's not a good place to be. In fact, in England, and I was at an excellent conference, Paul, I thought it was excellent earlier on this year, the LABC event, some councillors have now decided they will be providers of last resort. Could that happen in Northern Ireland? Well, I want to say to you, I think it already has. We are 30% down on staff from over the last 10 years. Now, what happens over in England at the moment I think is quite fascinating. In England, as Paul has already mentioned, people are grouping together to deliver the building control service at precisely the same time as we're tearing our groups apart. This here is the website for a group called CNC, of which Norwich Council is one of the councils. I maybe told you before, my brother was a councillor in England. He was a leader of a council and also the chair of the planning committee. He loved planning. He got his photograph in the paper and was seen to be creating lots and lots of jobs. He did not, on the other hand, like building control because it didn't get him in the paper. Norwich Council didn't care who did the building regulations, provided it was not them. And this is what is happening now. They've got CNC, but I want to say of these CNC guys, they are concentrating on the core building regulations that are valued by the public and by professions alike. I love this picture. This little girl is safe in this house because of building regulations being properly enforced. There will be means of escape in the event of fire from her bedroom. If she falls through that glass, it's safely glass. If there's a high wind, the house will not fall down, the drains, the sewage will work, everything will be just perfect. You've already had lots of examples of that. One of the examples I thought about earlier this year in Brazil, you remember there's a fire in a nightclub. What happened when the people were caught in that nightclub? People had to start digging holes in the wall to allow people to escape. Now, a cleverer way to do that is you put those holes in the wall at the start, right? And that's what building regulations do. That is why they're very, very important, and we need not to lose sight of that, because we do lose sight of that, you can end up with then what Robin Knox showed us can happen very, very easily. So what's our best move going forward as I move to the end of my presentation? Where do we go to from here? Well, I'm going to suggest all the good things that we have done have come from the core building regulations, and there are some of them. I'm not going to quote them all, but I'm going to talk about one: vacant properties. We have found that there are people out there, believe it or not, who were occupying their buildings but were not paying their rates, you see. So this is one of the things that was taken forward by Building Control in partnership with LPS, working across the country together and with our local finance people. And we found, in fact, that that is the case. People enjoy, like Google, not paying their tax, or Facebook and all these guys. These people were enjoying their properties, but they weren't paying their rates. And what that means is you have an inequitable distribution of rates. If you've only that number of people paying the rate burden and you extend it to that, everybody doesn't have as much to pay. So you're actually doing a public service and getting more money, which keeps on giving. Millions of pounds have been created. In fact, it was mentioned earlier about the value of work, and I trust my colleague Jonathan Hayes doesn't mind me quoting a conversation I had with him yesterday. We were talking about the value of work in Armagh. There is £1 million worth of work going on every week in the construction sector in Armagh. £1 million floating through the Armagh City and District Council economy. You can imagine that being replicated everywhere. This is the sort of statistics we need to gather up, and as Anthony said earlier, we need to be able to share this. But that all comes out of our connection to do completion inspections. This whole thing about vacant properties and all the rest of it. So there's lots and lots of examples there. In Craigavon, we realised £500,000 additional income because of finding these people who weren't paying the rates. They should have been paying their rates. In Belfast, I know it's been millions, and it keeps on giving. This is year on year. In fact, I made more money for the council in that exercise there than I did in fees last year. But there's all those other things as well, and they all come out of the core regulations. Quickly moving on, all of those things there as well. NILGA, the difficulty there is of people living in houses where the road has not been adopted, where the sewers don't work, where the bin lorries really oughtn't to go up there. We have a working group working on that with NILGA to see if we can take that forward, and we've made representation of the Assembly. All of this comes out of the core regulations. Part end drainage, completions, again, you can connect them all back. Time doesn't permit to go into them in any great detail, so we'll just go on then. Anybody that likes that picture, that's by a guy called G.H. Smith. He's an artist locally. I think he lives in the Ards Peninsula. But it sums up where we are at the moment, and we have to really seriously think about what road we want to go down. Now, do we want to get into bed with planning? Do we want to do something completely different? Who do you think planning is going to connect with? Are they going to connect with the Estates Department and the Council, or are they going to look to Building Control? I think we've already got enough information here today to suggest that they may look at Building Control. I was watching Grand Designs recently, and I noticed a guy got into problems with Oxford planning. Who comes onto the TV to talk about it? The head of planning and Building Control spoke about it. And in fact, I was at an event yesterday run by the RTPI, and the chap was there. It was from Devon, I think. He was the head of planning and Building Control. So I think I rest my case on that one. So we have been on a journey here in Northern Ireland. I think it's been a very exciting journey. But where does Building Control go in the future? We must not dilute our product offering to the point where we do things that nearly anybody else could do. I think we need to focus in on the core building regulations, the building regulations, and if we do that, I believe we'll not only survive, but thrive. And thank you very much, Chair and members, for your attention.